All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. My name is Wayne Dupree, along with Jason Robinson and Hutch Bailey Jr. I want to introduce, as our guest today, a very special young man. He is, we see him on TV being interviewed, and for the most part, he's trying to really explain and to wake up and inform a lot of Americans about the truth about what's going on in our country, domestically and overseas. And I want to thank Jason Robinson for connecting us to get this interview done today. Mr. Douglas, retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor. What's up, Colonel?
Well, Wayne, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm not sure about these other two. These guys from me. I don't know anything about them. I know all about you.
They let anybody on these shows anymore, you know.
We have open borders, so why not, right?
You know what, sir? We here on the show.
Jason talk about everybody in Atlanta was crazy.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I got scared. You know, what am I dealing with here? I know some people in Atlanta, and I don't think they're crazy, but you know, who knows?
Well, what's really crazy is this administration. We've been talking for the last year about the situation over in Ukraine. We haven't fallen for the headlines. We've been trying to tell everybody it's not going the way y'all think it's going. I mean, if it was, this whole thing would have been over about 9 months ago, and we haven't seen it. You have been very, very vivid and strong on what you're seeing over there. Can you give a little breakdown of what's going on?
Sure, I think the American people really need to know. And you're right; they don't get the straight truth because it's not popular with the people who govern us right now in Washington. The truth is that we worked tirelessly to create the conflict that we're in against Russia. We tried to move NATO's border right up to immediately next to Russia. We wanted to put troops, forces, and missiles there. The Russians knew that. They decided this is unacceptable. And they had been telling us for years, you know, whatever you do, we have no objections to what you're doing in Europe. That's fine. But don't push these NATO forces and your forces in particular up against our borders. Well, we ignored that. And I think the reason is this, Wayne. A lot of people in Washington decided, you know, Russia's weak. Russia's economy is fragile. The Russian military is weak and small. I think we can bully them. Well, that hasn't worked out very well. The Russian military today is larger and stronger than it's been since the 1980s. We've actually created a Frankenstein's monster that we said we were trying to prevent.
Yep.
Now, the good news is that the Russians don't want to march all the way to the Polish border. They don't want to govern Ukrainians. They never did. They were interested in ensuring that the Russians who live in Ukraine were treated equally before the law. That's really what the Minsk Accords were all about. And to be frank with you, as soon as this radical nationalist Ukrainian organization took power in 2014, it's grown steadily worse. More and more Russians have been persecuted and mistreated. And now it's reached the point where the Russians said, we've got to go in. There's no alternative to it because we're going to wake up with missiles on our doorstep, and that's unacceptable.
Right.
Colonel Macgregor, I know you don't know me, so I'll just tell you I'm a retired chief warrant officer in the United States Army. You got in a few years before me, but I wanted to let everybody know something. You're bona fides. You were the S3, the operations officer. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. In an armored cav squadron, I'm guessing, and you basically orchestrated the last great tank battle that the United States military was ever in, and it's a truly excellent feat. Can you touch on that just a little bit? 73 Easting.
Well, sure. It's an interesting story. I wrote a book about it. It's called Warrior's Rage. The generals loved it, so they banned it immediately. And it essentially tells you that we were dealing with senior officers that really didn't want to fight anybody, and were hoping that if they waited long enough, they'd give up under the steady bombardment of the U.S. Air Force. When that didn't happen, they grudgingly moved forward. We happened to have been the lead unit in front of 7th Corps. And we ended up going almost 100 miles. We encountered some resistance. It wasn't particularly strong, but then they told us, well, stop. You're going to go into reserve. And you've got to understand, here you have American soldiers that have gone hundreds of miles, if not thousands of miles. They've come all this way. They've been training for months. They are loaded with bear, and they are ready to annihilate whatever is in front of them. And suddenly somebody says, oh, stop. Well, it didn't happen, thank goodness. And I certainly had hoped that we would do more than we did at the time. But the good news is that the 1,100 men were excellent. I always tell everybody, we were fortunate in that you had exceptionally solid, intelligent soldiers. Because, you know, when you move into action, and we did on the 26th of February, it's sort of like a gun at a race. You fire the gun and it's go. And I don't care how influential you think you are if you're running the show. I was in a tank, and I was with the main attack, which was with Eagle Troop. And I had designated the supporting attacks. I'd done all those things. You're familiar with all that.
Yes, sir.
And off we went. And they just did a splendid job. And finally, we ran out of things to destroy. There was nothing left. And so I pulled up, and I got on the radio, and I said, hey, could somebody tell me where we are? Because it's a flat open desert. It's not one of those things where you can turn to the gas station over here on your left and figure out where you are. There's nothing out there. Right. So we stopped, and we did that. And then they told us, well, wait a minute. You didn't tell us that you were moving beyond the limit of advance. I said, well, you know, we ran into this force of about 2,500 troops in the Republican Guard that were part of this rear detachment defending the withdrawal. And once you committed, you don't stop. I mean, no one pulls up in front of the enemy and says, well, wait a minute, let me call higher headquarters and get permission to kill you. You just go through and you kill it. We'd run out. So then there was quiet on the other end. Next thing I heard was, pull back. Fall back to where you were supposed to have stopped. Well, at that point, I was pretty sick and tired of the way things had been run, and I came unglued. I only came unglued twice in the months leading up to the fight. And finally, the deputy regimental commander, who knew me very well, he went to the regimental commander. The regimental commander had taught me as a cadet at West Point. It wasn't as though we didn't know each other. And he said, look, I talked to the boss. You can stay where you are. Let us know what happens. You got to tell us what happens. Well, you know, you don't stop in the middle of this thing and start telling everybody what happens. You need a pause, and we waited until everything was dead. But that wasn't the end of it. We sat out there and suddenly discovered that we were on this little peninsula with 42 tanks and 42 Bradleys and 8 guns, and all the retreating Iraqi forces coming out of Kuwait were retreating across the entire front of the 7th Corps until they got to us, and suddenly we were in front of them. So we had literally in front of us a huge heavy metal graveyard with hundreds of vehicles destroyed. And then we fired 1,100 rounds from our 8 guns, which nobody else in the theater did. We fired all of our mortar ammunition. It really was an excellent battle. If you got to go to war, this was a great one to be in. But it was because everybody was trained. Everybody knew what they were doing. They didn't need to be micromanaged. I didn't micromanage anybody. And I remember at the end of this advance, I said, battle stations. This is Cougar 3. Report combat power. And I was certain that we had lost something. They all came back 100%. Then afterwards, while we were sitting out there, we did have 6 casualties. 1 man was killed, and we lost a Bradley. And that's unfortunate. But as I told everybody at the time, and there were a lot of angry soldiers, I said, look, there is no victory without some price. Right. And Sergeant Muller, he paid it for us. And, you know, there was a service. And I'm sorry to say there wasn't much of Sergeant Muller left. I mean, you could have put him in a sandwich bag. And I felt terrible about it because his dad, I met after the war, and he said, look, Nels wanted to be there. That's so typical. American soldiers want to be there. When we got ready to go from Germany down to Saudi Arabia, I remember people that we had not seen in weeks who'd gone AWOL showed up. said, I want to go, and that's the thing I love most about real soldiers. There was none of this, oh, I don't want to go, I'm going to hide out. No, absolutely not. People wanted to go, thank God, and they did a brilliant job. It's a wonderful story, but it's not very flattering to the generals.
Right.
So if there's ever a movie about it, and there have been attempts to make one, I don't know how the Army is going to respond to it, because the Army generals did not perform well.
Well, Hollywood's in the pocket of the military-industrial complex, so they won't put out a movie that's not approved. So,
well, I guess so. I don't know who's in whose pocket,
Right.
I mean,
so I'd like to give a shout out to Chuck.
Media and Run Hollywood, they're all the same. All the same people. They're all in the same class.
Right. I'd like to give a shout out. It's an honor to meet you and have you on the show. Give a shout out to my friend Chuck, who we have a mutual friend who connected us. So I appreciate that. And, the one piece I was hoping you could share with our audience, I think some of the biggest criticism that you have for this initiative in Ukraine is the lack of logistics or coordination of what's going on at the front. And I think our audience would really benefit a lot from some of that explanation. Like, now they're going to send them F-16s, but there's no way that it coordinates with the other activities that are happening over there. So can you just kind of give a quick overview of where so that our folks can understand?
Sure. I think the most important thing for everybody to know is that before you go to war, you have to be organized, trained, and equipped for war. You just don't pull a switch and say, oh, we're flying to country X and we're going to go to war. That's insane. We haven't fought anybody who could really fight back in more than, 25 years. That hasn't helped us, because troops get lazy. General officers don't have to share the danger. They're not likely to be injured. All you have to do is look at the numbers of generals who've been killed. 0. The Russians have lost generals, and everybody makes fun of that and says, oh, well, they're stupid. No. Those general officers were where they belonged, at the front, fighting.
Cool.
So we don't understand all the preparation, and I've been warning again and again and again not to intervene in Western Ukraine. We don't have the massive quantities of ammunition that we need. We don't have the air and theater missile defense that we need. We don't have the replacements standing by, the thousands of troops that will have to come forward and replace those of us who are killed or wounded. These things are not minor considerations. And I have the feeling often that these people in Washington are out of touch with reality. I mean, they remind me of people who want to be plumbers, but they've never snaked a drain. They've never replaced a garbage disposal. Do you guys understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a big problem.
Unmute, Wayne. Unmute.
Sorry, I got these grass cutters out back, and I didn't want to mess up the sound. Enemy, you've been talking about enemies, domestic enemies too. We have some craziness that's going on over here. Break that down for us.
I have concluded for a long time that Russia is not interested in going to war with us under any circumstances. They felt pushed into a corner. They had to act. The Chinese, in case you haven't noticed, they're on the downslide into a catastrophic economic disaster, to put it bluntly. That's partially real estate, shadow banking, corruption, you name it. Chinese are going to fight us. In fact, early this morning, I received a note that they'd lost a nuclear submarine. Chinese. I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, but I've been told that they lost one. And, the Chinese don't have a long history with big navies. They're not a naval power. Now, Japan is, but the Chinese are not. And I just don't think people appreciate that those are not the problems. Our problem is very simple. We have been ignoring the needs and the interests of the American people for decades. When I saw Joe Biden send this tweet out that he was announcing that every Hawaiian who had lost property in this disaster was going to get $700.
$700. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to be nasty, but $700 isn't going to take you very far from much of anything. And the notion that is what we're doing for those people is incomprehensible to me. How many hundreds of millions are we shipping right now to Ukraine? About 780 million. The Ukrainian army is absolutely annihilated. There's not much left. They've got about 37, 38 brigades under strength all along this long banana-shaped front where the Russian defenses are located. We have been urging them to attack, which is just stupid, because in the meantime, the Russians have put out millions of mines. They have 3 layers of defense. I mean, this is not brain surgery.
Right.
You don't hurl yourself into that. And then they think they may have 6 or 7 full-strength brigades in reserve. So that's maybe 25, 28,000 troops in reserve. The Russians have 300,000 troops in reserve they've never used. They have thousands and thousands of rockets and missiles and artillery ammunition. They are loaded with all the things they need to crush Ukraine. So people say to me, well, if that's true, then why hasn't Vladimir Putin done this? And I'll tell you why he hasn't done it. Because he looks at the Ukrainians as Orthodox Christians, Slavic Orthodox Christians, just like his own people. And he doesn't want to kill them. Now, that seems incomprehensible, especially if you listen to all the propaganda that is poured into everybody's ears. Putin is evil. Putin's a war criminal. Oh, come on. Give me a break.
Right.
And then there's this Zelensky character who used to play the piano with body parts and, just despicable sort of human being who runs around and everybody says, oh, he's the Churchill of the 21st century. Boy, are they wrong. This guy and his pals are going to disappear one night. They're all going to fly off to Venice, Miami, Cyprus, and retire on billions that they've stolen. And almost a fourth of the equipment, sometimes as much as a third that we've sent over there, has disappeared. It's vanished. This is the land of corruption. We've got a friend who was in Mexico and then he was in Ukraine. Came back, he said, Doug, Mexico looks pretty good compared with Ukraine when it comes to corruption. And we've lost 60,000 children. You were talking about Atlanta. We've been down that road in Atlanta with lost children.
Yeah.
And we now have this movie, The Sound of Freedom. It is horrific. I can't even imagine where those children are and who is abusing. And I don't even want to go down that road. But the truth is, Americans need to know this. And so I've been saying over and over and over again, this is not going to change. They're not going to win, the Ukrainians, and ultimately the Russians will continue to push west. They'll wait for a while and then they'll go west. And if we're really stupid, they'll march all the way to the Polish border. It may not happen this fall, could happen in the spring. It's not something they want to do. But Putin has no one to talk to. I mean, every time we say we're going to talk to him, well, the first thing he has to do is promise to withdraw all Russian forces immediately.
Right.
And then bend over and kiss his ass and tell us that we're the kings and we're the rulers and he has to abide by our rules, whatever they are. Nobody's completely figured out what this rule-based order is other than something we set up, we dominate, we decide. And we don't want to give any of that up. We want to continue to be able to bully the world in financial terms, political terms, and military terms. It's going to get tough because the military we have now is a shadow of what it was 30 years ago.
Colonel, if I could ask you one thing real quick. I know we're almost out of time, but back in World War II, I read that our best generals collectively decided that we would never physically invade the Russian landmass, that whole area, Eastern Europe. We would never get caught up and mired up in that. And now it seems like we've had a complete flip-flop with the general and flag officers. What happened? What's the state of our general officer corps right now that's probably twice as big as it was back then?
Oh, yes. I mean, we have 43, 44 four-stars, generals and admirals. For a force of 1 million, 1.1 million people in uniform in the United States Armed Forces. In World War II, in 1943, when we were at the height of the war, we had 12.2 million people in the armed forces. We had 7 4-stars. I can tell you who they were. I mean, it's very easy. George Marshall, Douglas MacArthur, Hap Arnold.
Omar Bradley.
Well, no, that comes after the war. These people were promoted when the war was well over.
Roger.
My point, and Nimitz and Leahy and Eisenhower and Nimitz, Leahy and King, the chief of naval operations. They ran the show. They did a pretty damn good job. It wasn't perfect, by the way. War never is. It's a very messy business. You're dealing with millions of people. You don't know what they're going to do. But the point is, what we've got now is a joke.
Right.
We look like a banana republic. And all these decorations for what? Sitting in the green zone while soldiers go out and are blown to pieces on patrol? Now, I don't know how American soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen put up with it. I don't know how they do it.
Well, Colonel, we appreciate you taking time to be on the show. It's been an honor. It's been something we've been really excited to have you on because I know we all follow you. You're not going to do
it again, right? Is that what you're going to tell me?
Oh, no. Yes, we will. Yes,
we should come on every week.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll make you a regular guest.
Obviously, I've seen Mr. Dupree, and he's well known, and I appreciate you bringing me on very much.
So where can people follow you?
Guys do.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
I was going to say, where should people follow you, Colonel Macgregor, so that they can keep up with what you're working on and keep hearing your voice?
Well, you can go on YouTube and Google me, and all sorts of things will come up. I'm now the CEO of a new organization called Our Country, Our Choice. It's nonpartisan because we've effectively decided to write off the two parties. And we're now issue focused. And we are going to support people that believe the things that we do. And, we start with the very basics: God, country, and family. Close the borders, restore the rule of law, bring the forces home. We have much work to do here. We've ignored America for decades. We can't do it anymore.